Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Welcome, friends, family in Christ. We're going to jump right into it today with Andy Woods, pastor, teacher, Sugar Land Bible Church in Texas, author of many books, including Babylon, the Bookends of Prophetic History, and the Middle East Meltdown. We're going to focus on that today a little bit. He's also the president of Chafer Theological Seminary, founder of Andy Woods Ministries, and I really want to recommend, friends, you go to andywoodsministries.org. And I believe every week they put their pastor's point of view on the website, right there on the home page. I was watching one earlier. The last 2 weeks, I really encourage you, strongly encourage you to watch Andy's pastor's point of view, particularly the one from October 20, and that's the prophetic implications of Israel's war. So Andy, welcome back to the show.
Hey, David, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your time. I know you just got done recording and now you're doing another show, but we appreciate your voice. And you've written a lot about this through the years on prophecy from the biblical worldview. And I'll tell you, when I was going back after what happened in Israel, October 7, I was going back and looking at your book, Middle East Meltdown, and reading some of this. I'm going, wow, you were trying to, send the warning out. There will be an Islamic invasion of Israel. Why don't you just give us an overview of the book, and we'll just take it from there regarding what's happening now today.
Yeah, well, it's a book about Ezekiel 38 and 39, which I interpret and understand as a future eschatological end-time invasion of Israel in the last days. And the book is just sort of an explanation of who is involved. It names the principal players. Why is the invasion going to happen? It's ultimately rooted in anti-Semitism and a desire to gain Israel's wealth. I deal with the when question. I try to explain when I think it's going to happen relative to God's total end-time program as revealed in Scripture. And then I get into the how question. How is the world stage being set up for the fulfillment of the prophecy? I do have to say that every time I've gone back and revisited the issue, the scenario that was outlined in the book in, I think, 2016 does not become more murky or ambiguous. It becomes more and more clear. And so it's really an exciting prophecy to study.
So I want to, again, put that book cover up on the screen there, The Middle East Meltdown. You get on Amazon and you go to Andy Woods Ministries. But the subtitle, The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel. And he says in the description, no matter which presidential administration comes into office in this nation, America, and no matter how the calendar turns, this is an issue that does not seem to go away. And it won't, because as you said, Ezekiel foresaw these things 2,600 years ago. But Andy, what are your thoughts on Psalm 83, which you read that and you go, wow, that could be the headlines from what just happened over in early October here in Israel. Psalm 83 compared to what we're looking at as far as future prophetic psalms regarding this invasion.
Well, my view on Psalm 83 is really not as exciting as a lot of people who look at that psalm as a particular prophecy, either fulfilled in 1948, 1967, 1973, or is being fulfilled right now. I just look at Psalm 83 as what's called an imprecatory prayer. The psalmist is really not making a prediction. He is just praying God's judgment on Israel's perennial enemies. And what makes Psalm 83 tricky is the psalmist names the nations that he wants God to judge. So I just see it as a prayer. In fact, there's no war in Psalm 83. Unlike Ezekiel 38 and 39, it's just a kind of a prayer that Asaph is praying. He names God's enemies and he says, Lord, I just want you to take these people out. So that's why I say my view is not as exciting as a lot of other prophecy teachers.
So it's okay for us to name names of our enemies and ask God to take them out? I'm kidding. That's what we want to do sometimes, isn't it? But so let's go over to some of the names. 9 names mentioned in Ezekiel 38 from the book you talk about in the Middle East Meltdown. And we hear a lot about the Gog-Magog war. You've got Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Put, Cush, Gomer, and Togarmah. Now, could you please explain for people that have not heard some of those? Most people maybe have heard of Persia, but the others might be a little foreign to people who are not students of Bible prophecy. Andy, why are these really important when you talk about the coming invasion of Israel in the end times?
Well, they're significant because you'll find them in Genesis 10. Okay. Genesis chapter 10 is the table of nations. It's where Noah and his descendants settled, post-flood. And it's just a matter of consulting some historical sources like Josephus and Herodotus and figuring out where these people groups eventually settled. And once you identify the modern nations containing those people groups, you see those are the names that Ezekiel mentions in chapter 38 and 39, that will be involved in the end time invasion. So I try to deal with this in the book in a chapter called Who was involved. Mm-hmm. But the principal players, would be Russia, Turkey, Iran, the Sudan, Libya, and a few others that will join forces with Russia and invade the nation of Israel in the end times. And it's so interesting to look at the headlines. Those are the very nations that are posturing against Israel today.
Mm-hmm. By the way, in that first chapter on the Who, you say, what is the overarching motive of these nations attacking Israel? I think the motive is pretty clear, but I want to put up that graphic with Israel surrounded. And Andy, tell us about this. I mean, if we don't know their motive, we better wake up. Go ahead and explain this.
Well, that graph is very interesting because what you hear on the media constantly is Israel is an oppressor.
Yeah.
Even what's happened since October the 7th, Israel is the bad guy. But that map dispels that because those green areas represent Islamic theocracies who in their very own charters threatened to drive Israel into the Mediterranean Sea. That little tiny red dot, in fact, we had to draw an arrow towards it because you can't even see it,
exactly.
Represents Israel, which, by the way, is the only semblance of a democracy/Republican form of government in the region. And they'll never show you this map on CNN or MSNBC.
No.
Because it would dispel the narrative. What the world wants you to think is, well, if Israel just gave up a little more territory, we'd have peace in the region. Jeez. Which is obviously a ridiculous idea when you look at the size of this map. So that's why I like this map. Sometimes a picture, is worth 1,000 words. It's an inconvenient truth,
yep,
which dispels the narrative that Israel is somehow the bad guy.
So we're going to be coming back to this, referring to that, because that is so clear. There is so much misinformation and ignorance about this, but sadly, Andy Woods, it's even in the church. When it comes to Bible prophecy, when it comes to Israel and her history and Genesis, what we were just talking about, and Ezekiel, there's so much ignorance. But when you look at that, you hear people in America, they're having their parades, the pro-Palestinian protests and other things, even some members of Congress. You're thinking, how could they possibly justify supporting Hamas? When you look at this, when you look at Israel, the size of New Jersey, and in light of what you just explained, they are clearly surrounded, outnumbered. And they're certainly not the colonizers that, some in the West would say they are. That's their talking points. Share a little bit more about that, please, because there's a lot of people that need to know how to respond to others who are misinformed.
Well, when you go back to 1948, when Israel, the modern state of Israel, was born, the world was on the side of Israel. And the reason for that is because of the Holocaust, which just happened a few years earlier. Mm-hmm. And the world felt sorry for Israel. And then you factor in that with the fact that when the Arabs attacked Israel in 48, 67, and 73, they got beaten very, very badly. And it's at that point, many believe, analysts believe, that Yasser Arafat began to get schooling from the then Soviet Union,
Yes.
who were in Russia today masters of propaganda. And they said, you're not going to beat these people militarily. What you have to do is you have to shift world opinion to the point where you get the Jews to give up a territory within their own land called the Palestinian state. And once you do that, get this two-state solution, you can use it for the final solution, the same way Gaza is being used to launch rockets into the land of Israel. Mm-hmm. And so you have to put pressure on the Israelis via the global community to get them to give up this territory. They call it the West Bank. The Bible calls it Judea and Samaria. And so that's where the propaganda war and the narrative war started happening. And it's one of the great myths of the Middle East that has now been perpetrated, a giant lie that the media and politicians and academics have swallowed, that Israel stole the land from somebody else, this mythical group called the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And Israel stole the land from a thriving indigenous civilization. And if you convince the world that that's true, then the world will pressure Israel to create literally a terrorist state within your own borders. And once you do that, you can use the two-state solution to accomplish your goal of a final solution. So what we're involved in is a massive narrative war. Mm-hmm. And this is what most Americans are being hit with, but they just don't have as you say, the facts at their fingertips to know how to counter it.
And in the church, we don't have a grasp of Bible prophecy. We've got to take a break. And we come back, I'm going to ask you, what is your take on how we almost lost? I can't say we've lost the propaganda war, but that certainly laid the groundwork to what we're seeing today and the deception in the West. We'll be right back with Andy Woods on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily, world news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
Andy Woods is our guest today. Andy Woods Ministries. Make sure to watch his Pastor's Point of View every week. You can get that on his website or on his YouTube. But Andy, how have we got so far behind in the propaganda war? How have they been so successful? I mean, maybe aside from the universities in America, but by the way, I read a recent survey, I think 1% are conservative, but how did it seems like we're really losing and we're so far behind the propaganda war. They might not even need the military, but no, the propaganda is very important because it's lies and deception. Please share your thoughts on that.
Well, there is a concerted agenda in the Pastor's Point of View that we recorded that's going to be released Friday, I think October the 27th. We talk about members of the Biden administration, one man in particular who has a background of going into Christian colleges or colleges in general and targeting Christians to change their mind on this issue, to make them supporters not of Israel, but rather supporters of the so-called Palestinians. And that's a movement called Christian Palestinianism. It's designed to shift the narrative away from Christian Zionism to Christian Palestinianism, and to make it sound as if Israel is the oppressor and the Palestinians are the victims. And so one of the reasons things have shifted or changed in the church relates to the fact that our theology has been targeted. And then you couple that with the idea that most pastors and churches aren't teaching on prophecy anyway. Mm-hmm. And so Christians don't really have a strong theological basis for standing for Israel when she's attacked the way she has. So the church has been intentionally targeted, and we've largely brought it on ourselves through our own sort of self-censorship, where we don't talk about Bible prophecy anymore.
Doesn't it seem like Christian Palestinianism is an oxymoron? And wouldn't that be like saying Christian Islamism or something like that. Can you, I mean, to you and I, that's like, what, how ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, the name Palestine comes from Philistine.
Right.
And it's a term that Emperor Hadrian came up with in the 2nd century when he wanted to pretend like the Jews, were never in the land of Israel at all after they had been displaced. And he mocked the Jewish people by naming that territory called the land of Israel. Matthew chapter 2, verses 19 through 21 calls it the land of Israel. He wanted to name it Palestine after Israel's ancient enemies. And so when we use this term Palestine, we have to understand that we're using a loaded, politically loaded, anti-Semitic term without fully realizing it. So the name Palestine is not found in the Bible any more than the name West Bank is found in the Bible. These are intentionally chosen, politically loaded terms to create, with the goal of this two-state solution, a terrorist state within the borders of Israel to accomplish Islam's ultimate goal of the final solution.
So I do want to get back to your book, The Middle East Meltdown, but I want to go to a slide that you recently talked about, transforming David into Goliath. And I want you to walk us through this and tell us what we're looking at as far as this comparison goes.
Well, that's just a chart that I came up with, taking some information from a website called Middle East Facts. And when you look at that chart, you see very fast that Israel is not the oppressor, contrary to what the media says. So when you look at the left-hand column, it's got different categories. And then under each category, you look at Israel's neighbors versus Israel. So Israel has 21 neighbors versus one Israel. The neighbor size is 640 times Israel's size. Israel is 1/19 the size of California. The population of Israel's neighbors is 250 million, 1.4 billion Muslims worldwide. Israel is just a meager nation of 7 million people. All of those neighbors are Islamic theocracies and dictatorships. Israel is the lone democratic/republic in that part of the world. Israel's neighbors control most of the world's oil supply. Israel is sitting on some potential oil discoveries. None of these neighbors want peace with Israel, with the exception of Jordan and Egypt, who entered into treaties with Israel. But Israel, by contrast, has expressed a desire to live in peace with her neighbors, and her neighbors are controlled by a holy book called the Quran, which commands worldwide submission to Islam. Israel, by contrast, is controlled by the Torah, which carves out for her a little sliver of real estate on the Mediterranean coast. So anybody that looks at a chart like that or a map that we had earlier can't feel sorry for the Rashida Tlaibs, the Ilhan Omars, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world, who are organizing protest movements on behalf of the Palestinians, trying to pretend that Israel is oppressing the Palestinians.
Wow. You mentioned their names. Thank you. They are endorsing murder, rape, the beheading of babies, torture, burning people alive. We've got Democrats in our government, and we've got the Muslim Brotherhood in our government too, but we've got Democrats and we've got people in our country that are endorsing this. Some of them are deceived, others are deceivers. Andy, what are your thoughts on that? It's very dangerous because of the ignorance and the misinformation that people are seeing this, thinking, Israel doesn't deserve to defend herself. And go ahead, share your thoughts.
Well, they're calling for a ceasefire. Meaning what? Israel is attacked viciously. You just depicted it.
Yeah.
And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says we need a ceasefire. What is she talking about? What she's saying is Israel doesn't have a right to defend herself.
That's right.
And let me draw this equivalent. I mean, let's say some sort of hostile force took over California and Florida, and they wanted a third of Washington, D.C. And let's say they got all of that. And they used those California and Florida as beachheads to launch rocket attacks into the rest of the United States. I mean, what in the world would we do with that? Anybody in their right mind says we need to root out terrorist cells within our own country. Any nation has the right to do that. And what they're saying with let's have a ceasefire, let's have a protest movement and pretend like Israel brought all of this on themselves is Israel can't function like any other sovereign nation, has a right to function and root out terror within its own territory. So Israel is being put under a standard that we would not expect or require of any normal sovereign nation, is what they're saying.
That's right. That's right. Don't fight back. Did you see the Babylon Bee? They had a meme saying, like Hamas saying, well, wait a minute, we wanted the kind of war where they weren't going to fight back. But Andy, gosh, there's so much. And we've just got about 5 minutes left. I have not talked to you since October 7, because our show was before that previously. Your original thoughts, I mean, a lot of us were surprised. It seemed like our Pearl Harbor or 9/11, where we were caught off guard. Israel, with all their technology and defense system and the Iron Dome, everything, they were caught off guard, and Hamas got in there. What are your overall thoughts on what happened?
Well, it is interesting how they had this intelligence gap, because this attack was timed 50 years to the day of the Yom Kippur War when that broke out. So Israel should have known this is coming. I'm saddened to watch a lot of my evangelical colleagues move into conspiracy theories and say, well, Netanyahu was in on it and he wanted to get attacked. He wanted this decapitation of babies to occur, to increase his own power. I think those types of statements are ridiculous.
Yep,
I don't
responsible
any of it. But I do believe that the Biden administration and Intel does not like Netanyahu because of his stance on the judicial bypass, where he weakened the power of the Israeli Supreme Court, which was kind of a rogue entity at the time, which was passing, politically incorrect legislation independent of the jurisdiction of the prime minister and the people of Israel. Well, Netanyahu took a stand against that. And that weakened liberalism within Israel. And the Biden administration, I think, took note of that. And with some of their friends in Intel, Patrick Byrne on his Twitter feed offers this as a plausible potential explanation. This was payback time by Biden and his friends for Netanyahu's stance on this judicial bypass. And somehow they were able to influence things which damaged Israeli intelligence. I'm much more comfortable with an explanation like that than moving into this wild conspiracy theory where, Netanyahu is somehow the bad guy.
So what are your brief thoughts on the seemingly lack of accountability when it comes to they're spending American taxpayer dollars to fund Iran? And from what I've recently read, I think Biden's trying to play both sides here. I'm sending Hamas some money, but I'm sending Israel some money. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Biden administration is currently the most anti-Israel administration that we've ever had in American history.
That's right.
And I just got finished recording A Pastor's Point of View, which is going to be released Friday, October the 27th. And I quote there from an article. It's from John Solomon's website. And he goes through player after player that has a key position in the Biden administration, right down to Blinken. And he said, let's look at the background of these people. It's stunning the amount of anti-Israel activities that they've been involved in. And so if for no other reason, we really need to clean house November of 2024. We don't need an administration that's influenced by anti-Israelism. We need an administration much like the Trump administration.
Yes.
That did a great many beneficial things on behalf of the Jewish nation.
Yeah, the Trump administration, the most pro-Israel in our history, from my understanding, his policies, moving the embassy. So they had a good relationship with Netanyahu. But anyway, Andy, we're going to have to pick this up another time. We've got to have this conversation continue. There's so much, as you said, we need to talk about. We could do 2 hours. That's why you do what, an hour, hour and a half, Pastor's Point of View?
Well, I was supposed to do an hour, but lately I've been busting the clock again just because of the gravity of the circumstances.
Yeah, and it is serious. We need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We know, read Zechariah 12, 13, 14. We didn't get to that. I wanted to touch on that, especially Zechariah 12, 2 and 3. God's going to win in the end. He does win. We win. But we have to get through some really ugly times, some really disheartening, potentially, times. Your final thoughts to encourage Christians in America on how we can respond to people who are misinformed or don't understand Bible prophecy?
Well, just direct them back to facts. Facts are stubborn things, like the chart we put up, the map we put up, and understand that this is really a trial related to God's faithfulness. It's encouraging that God is going to keep his word to the Jew, as we see him doing. Because if he's going to keep his word to the Jew, he's going to keep his word to you. And we can trust him as a covenant-keeping, promise-keeping God.
Amen. God bless you, Brother Andy Woods Ministries. Check it out, friends. Andy, we'll talk to you hopefully soon. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up. Let's see. What do we have on tap tomorrow? It is Pastor Joe Schimmel of Simi Valley, California, Blessed Hope Chapel, and founder of Good Fight Ministries. He's got a children's book out, and we'll talk with him tomorrow on Worldview Matters. God bless you. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.